Hello and welcome back to Bookish. This is going to be uncomfortable for me. Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading and I decided to get into the spirit of BookTube this year and to kind of get into poetry and to kind of buddy read a poet a month and pick some poems and go over those and just kind of read them, I guess, and talk about them. And the poet we decided to start with is W.B. Yeats. Yeats was an Irish poet who lived a fairly long life, from about the second third of the 19th century into the middle of the 20th century, and he wrote a lot of poems. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I think, sometime, I want to say, in the 1920s or so. And then he went on to write, after he won the Nobel Prize, to write what many people consider to be his best volume of poetry, which is called The Tower. Kelly and I had essentially, or at least I didn't have any idea where to start. Her husband Jason, from Old Blues Chapter and Verse, helped us by kind of picking out some poems that he thought would give us a taste for Yeats's poetry and kind of a simpler entry point into talking about Yeats. My dog doesn't want me to read poetry either. He's probably exactly right. Anyway, so we picked out some poems, and those are the poems that we looked at. And from that, I picked two. I think Kelly picked one or two. I'll leave a link to her video as well. So Yeats, over the course of his long writing career, had all kinds of different themes. He wrote what I believe we would call lyrical poetry. He wrote poems based on Irish folklore. He got into mysticism later in his life, and that influenced his poetry. His poetry was influenced by world events. He was definitely influenced by the Easter Rising and the Irish independence movement and the First World War, and events like that. And he wrote poems about all those things. So there's a lot of poetry to choose from, and I just chose two poems. Both of whom I think are fairly famous poems by Yeats. So the first poem I chose is The Wild Swans at Coole. So Yeats became friends with an Irish woman named Lady Anne Gregory, who lived in a mansion house at a place called Coole. Yeats visited her there many times over the years, and they were really great friends. It was Lady Gregory talked Yeats into helping to found the Irish National Theatre and got him involved in that way. And so essentially this is a poem inspired by those visits to the grounds and the gardens at her home. So here we go. The Wild Swans at Coole. The trees are in their autumn beauty. The woodland paths are dry. Under the October twilight the water mirrors a still sky. Upon the brimming water among the stones are 59 swans. The 19th autumn has come upon me since I first made my count. I saw before I had well finished all suddenly mount and scatter wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. I have looked upon those brilliant creatures, and now my heart is sore. All's changed since I, hearing at twilight the first time on this shore, the bell beat of their wings above my head, trod with a lighter tread. Unwearied still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable streams, or climb the air. Their hearts have not grown old. Passion or conquest wander where they will, attend upon them still. But now they drift on the still water, mysterious, beautiful. Among what rushes will they build? By what lake's edge or pool delight men's eyes when I awake some day to find they have flown away. So that's my best reading, and I had to cut and go back and do the last group of lines there because I made a mistake. And you can probably tell from my reading that my reading is far from perfect, and this is one of those things I struggle with Yeats and poetry in general. I have a really hard time picking up the rhythms of poetry, and I'm not sure Yeats is helping me out here. I listened to a recording of this read on the Poetry Foundation website where I'm reading the poem from, and I've listened to Yeats read his own poems, and to be honest with you, it appears as though there are all kinds of different ways in which people read them, but I have a feeling that in my reading I missed some of the points of emphasis, and I missed some of the rhythm and the pacing. I think it's a fairly straightforward poem about essentially aging and what's lost in the aging process. He talks about how much time has passed, that, he's 19 years since he first came to this place and saw the swans. I find it interesting that when he counts the swans, the number of swans he counts is 9 and 50, or 59 swans. I find that interesting in part because later in the poem he writes, unwearied still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable streams or climb the air. Swans are traditionally thought to mate for life, and that the pairs of these swans are unwearied by that marriage, by that connection between them, and that they paddle along together through life like a man and a wife would. Well, if that's the case, then the fact that there are 59 swans, which you referred to earlier, seems to be interesting to me, because then there's one swan left out. There has to be at least one lonely swan among 29 pairs. Of course, in nature, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but I just wonder if that's why he chose that number. One of the things I learned about Yeats in doing this is that Yeats didn't get married until really much later in life. I believe he was in his 50s when he finally married. And in reading a lot of other Yeats poems, in trying to get ready for this, I noticed that a lot of them are about marriage or disappointed love or love coming to an end. And so I wonder if this is Yeats feeling the years pass, and perhaps before he's gotten married, thinking about himself being alone and not like the other swans. These beautiful creatures, maybe they represent women, maybe they represent youth, have left him and have gone, and there'll be something for other men to enjoy. That's about as good as I could do at an interpretation of the wild swans at Cool. So the second poem I chose is much shorter, and it's called When You Are Old. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read, and dream of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true, but one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled, and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. On the surface, I think When You're Old appears to be the kind of poem that you would write to your lover, to your wife, as you were aging, as you got older, remembering what she was like and what you were like when you were younger. But I think when you pay a little bit more attention, this is clearly, to me, I think, kind of you missed out, darling. I loved you in a way other men didn't love you. You chose not to be with me. He's kind of essentially saying she should feel bad about that when she gets old, and that she will regret that when she gets older. I think it's important to know that Yeats was in love with an actress in Ireland. I believe her name was Maud. I'm going to pronounce her last name Gone. It was spelled Gonne. And he was in love with her and courted her and tried to woo her for, according to what I've read, around 3 decades, and then ultimately she rejected him. She was an Irish nationalist. She was a member of the violent faction trying to gain Irish independence. I believe the man she eventually married was a part of the Easter 1916 uprising, and he may have actually been executed for taking part in that. But to me, this is who Yeats is referring to in this poem. When he says, "But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face," he essentially means that he loved her regardless, I think, of her mood, regardless of her looks over time, regardless of the fact that she seemed to be seeking something probably beyond marriage, and to be seeking something maybe that was hard to define, that he loved her for who she really was. Anyway, there you go. That's the best I can do, I think, with an interpretation of Yeats's poem, when you are old. I kind of wanted to give this a shot on my own without consulting a lot of sources that analyzed the poems for me. I did historical background research on Yeats, and if there was historical information about the poem, I read that. But I tried not to read interpretations, because I think if I'm really going to enjoy poetry, I have to start, trying to interpret and understand it on my own. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section, and as always, thanks for watching.